Amen.
All right. Thank you, Carlita. Well, how many fathers do we have here with us today? Let me see your hands. All right. Well, happy Father's Day. Excited to celebrate this day with you. So I was thinking that my dad might be the oldest father with us today. My dad just turned 88, and he's here. Let's give my dad a hand for Father's Day. But then I got a text from one of my longest friends in my life, and remember I told you about this friend. I grew up across the street from him in Prairie Village, Kansas, and his name is Michael Jackson. And Michael, raise your hand if you guys ever wanted to. Michael still lives. If you ever wanted to meet Michael, this is Michael Jackson. No kidding. That's not a joke, all right? But here's the thing. I get a text from Michael, and he says his wife, Shelley, and his dad is coming with him today. And so my dad taught me to never address an older man by his first name, right? So this is Mr. Jackson, who's 97, and he's here today. Yes. So Harold Jackson, Mr. Jackson, and a World War II veteran. Wow. So, man, I'm honored to see you again, Mr. Jackson. So wonderful, so good. Yeah, so somebody asked me, am I a dad? I am not, but I've been a pastor for over 40 years, and all of my Catholic friends and recovering Catholic friends have always called me Father Fred. Father Fred. And they weren't sure what to call me, because I didn't quite look like a father, but I would tell them, I said, hey, if you're struggling with what to call me, Most Holy Reverend would work. But I never had a single person take me up on that. And then they'd usually just drop the father and just go with Fred. So anyway, Fred's good. But so good to celebrate with you today. We're in a series called Prophetic Imagination. And I'm looking at some of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. And if you were to read all of the major prophets and the minor prophets in the Hebrew Bible, and then you kind of summarize their message, and this is what I've done, and kind of doing that in this whole series, you would realize that the prophets really had a vision for two things. They had a vision for two things. One was freedom from idolatry, and then one was a world where social justice ruled. Justice. It was a vision for freedom and justice. But what they saw in the world was, one, idolatry kept people in bondage instead of moving them into freedom. And two, injustices abounded everywhere. And so the prophetic imagination envisioned a world in which people were free from idolatry and in which injustices had been eliminated. It's a beautiful vision. This is the prophetic imagination. And so this is what we're dealing with. So the first three messages in this series, I've been dealing with the topic of idolatry and addiction, because I really think in our culture today, idolatry really manifests itself in forms of addiction. And then next week, we'll start looking at justice issues and tackling issues of injustice and a vision for justice as well, all right? And looking at the prophets. So I'm curious how many of you have wrestled, and you don't have to raise your hands on this, but maybe with minor addiction issues or difficult addiction, or maybe you've gone through heavy kinds of addictions that maybe almost took your life out. Lots of different ways that addiction manifests. I woke up this morning, I was thinking about my message, and a song came into my mind. And I'm going to read you the lyrics, and somebody tell me who this is from, okay? Do you have the time to listen to me whine about nothing and everything all at once? You already said it. Green Day. All right? It's a great wake up Sunday morning, start your day off with Green Day, and then come to church. It's perfect, all right? Do you have the time to listen to me whine about nothing and everything all at once? I am one of those melodramatic fools, neurotic to the core, no doubt about it. Sometimes I give myself the creeps. Sometimes my mind plays tricks on me. It all keeps adding up. I think I'm cracking up. Am I just paranoid, or am I stoned? Which one? I don't know. Okay. They do, don't they? All right. Well, a couple of weeks ago, we started a yoga and meditation class here at Living Water Christian Church. And I had a vision for this, and I invited one of my yoga friends who's a teacher to do 45 minutes of yoga at the beginning of the class, and then we end it with 30 minutes of meditation. I invited one of my meditation teachers to do the meditation part. And so we met up here first Wednesday night of the course and had close to 20 people, had 25 people the second night. The whole foyer room was filled with yoga mats. It was really cool. And I had taken out, I was in my shorts and, my yoga outfit. Like, it's just shorts and a t-shirt. It's not really too fancy. And I took out my wallet and my keys, laid them on a table. And then, we moved all the furniture and did the class, greeted people after the class, did a little debriefing with Brian and Pam. And then I took off, locked up, went home, got situated at home. And then all of a sudden I realized I didn't have my wallet. My wallet was gone. I looked all over the house for my wallet. I looked in my Jeep, couldn't find it. I thought, man, I must have left it on that table back there at church. So I drive back up to church. It's like 9:30. It's dark, and I'm flipping the lights on. I'm looking, because, the furniture's around. Everybody laid their wallets and purses around. And, well, I looked everywhere. I looked in the parking lot. I couldn't find my wallet. I'm thinking, dang it. Maybe somebody saw it. Maybe they picked it up thinking somebody left it, or, maybe it got misplaced and all the hustle bustle. So I knew most of the people in the class, so I started texting everybody Friday night. Hey, did you see a wallet? Hey, would you check your stuff and, just make sure it didn't get misplaced or something like that? Well, by Thursday morning, everybody in the class had gotten back to me. No wallet. I'm freaking out now. My amygdala, do you guys know what an amygdala is? You should. All of you have one. Whether you knew it or not, you've got an amygdala. And it is the most ancient part of your brain. It's some people call it the reptilian brain. And it's the place where all of it's the part of the brain that is the fight, flight, freeze part of your brain, okay? Now, this is real science. I'm not like just feeding you a bunch of stuff, Okay, so fight, flight, freeze part of the brain. It's the oldest part of the brain. It's the part of your brain that evolved over time to protect you from predators and the hunter and gatherer time periods. Like if a wild animal is going to kill you, this is the part of your brain that goes bing, and triggers you, fight, flight, freeze. It's trying to save your life. Your amygdala is always trying to save your life. And in a day and age when you could get eaten by a lion, it worked really well. But in a day and age like this one, where we don't have predator threats like that all the time, what happens is our amygdala stores trauma, stores hurt, stores pain, stores things that we don't like, and then it tries to remember and scan the whole horizon for things that might harm you and hurt you again, and then it stores those things. So it's constantly scanning your life, and then it's trying to go zing and trigger you to save your life. But it's kind of like a hyperactive little kid that's like zinging you all the time and isn't always rational. Your amygdala, in fact, can be highly irrational. For example, if I'm hiking or riding my bike or mountain biking or doing rock climbing and I'm in life-threatening situations, there's actually times when my amygdala has saved my life. But most of the time it just causes me extreme anxiety, right? And many times it's based on something that's totally irrational. Like I think I have an overactive amygdala. And some of us are more prone to what we call amygdala hijacks. That's where something happens, our amygdala triggers us into fight, flight, freeze, and it really isn't connected to reality. Something in reality triggered it. The emotions that it gives us are real, but the scenarios that we create in our head can be completely irrational. And so, man, I'm freaking out. I come back up Thursday morning. I search all over the parking lot for my wallet. I look through my Jeep. I look everywhere. I look through my house. I try to retrace every step that I could hit. I'm flipped now. I'm like going, I'm so busy. I've been working morning, noon, and night, 7 days a week. I don't have time for this guy. So when my amygdala triggers and I'm getting like anxious, and I'm imagining all kinds of scenarios that might not be true, then I start complaining. And, I've prayed to God every day of my life, all day long, so I've practiced prayer for 50 years. So I was like, God, I really need this right now. Have you ever prayed that one? Not that it's God's fault, right? God may not have had a thing to do with it, but, He's right there. I'm praying. God, come on, man. Give me a break. And, so all of that kind of stuff, right? Well, turns out, I'd slipped that wallet in my pocket before I left the building. Didn't even realize that when I went to the bathroom when I got home, it fell out of my pocket, slid under the shower curtain. So by Thursday afternoon, this is a Wednesday night class, by Thursday afternoon, I'm canceling my credit cards. I'm going to the DMV, the wonderful DMV, to get my driver's license replaced, right? You just think about all this. I spent all Thursday, God, I got new insurance. I was trying to think through all the things that are in my wallet. I'm 62. I've never lost a wallet. But my amygdala was freaking out. And what was so amazing was that I had gone through that yoga and meditation class. I had such a flow of peace and serenity. It was just, I was feeling it. I was going home. I was so chill. I was zen, I was like, and then, So, 24 hours later, after I'd canceled everything, done all of that stuff, go to the bathroom again. What's that poking out under the shower curtain? Oh, it's my wallet. It's right there the whole time. It was never really lost. The reality of the situation was Fred just misplaced his wallet. Now, think about what kicks off your anxiety, your amygdala. It can be real pain, it can be real trauma, it can be real suffering. It can be like a conflict in a relationship with your spouse or your friend or a coworker or your children. How many of you fathers or parents have ever had your amygdala get kicked off by something that happened in your kid's life? Holy crud, right? It's I remember one time when my mom thought that one of her kids had drowned in a lake. And I can still remember the panic. I was 10 and my sisters were 5, 4, 3, something I don't know. They're not that big. Anyway, I can't think of it. But anyway, they're younger. And my 3 sisters are younger. But I can remember my mom in a panic thinking that one of her kids had drowned in the lake. She couldn't find one of her kids. And so you just your brain just goes crazy. And as a pastor, even though I don't have kids, I still connect with the people that are in my flock in that way. And so all kinds of things can trigger, right? And I didn't sleep for 3 decades. And then I finally decided I got to deal some because it got caught up to me after a while. When I say didn't sleep, 3 hours a night for about 3 decades. So then I go to a psychiatrist, try to start dealing with my sleep issue. He, as an old school psychiatrist, puts me on Xanax, and then it didn't work after a while, and then I tried Xanax and alcohol, and then that got me into trouble. Now, what does that have to do with idolatry? Well, idolatry is where we, and by the way, the Old Testament prophets always used to kind of poke fun at idolatry. Like if you read them carefully, like Jeremiah, who we're looking at today. And what they would do, they would realize that like these people make these idols out of wood or gold or silver, some kind of material, and they fashion it, and then they worship it, and they run to it for peace and comfort, but it lies to them. It doesn't supply. It doesn't meet their true needs, okay? So like Jeremiah is kind of poking fun at these idols. In Jeremiah 10, it says, their gods are like helpless scarecrows in a cucumber field. Now, if you think about it, if you think about what is your addiction? By the way, you can have a false idea of God. Even your God concept can be on the idolater side. You can have an addiction that is related to a substance. It could be food, alcohol, drugs of some sort. Or it can be an addiction that's related to behavior, because behaviors can sometimes create the same endorphin release as substances. So it could be gaming, it could be sex, it could be shopping, it could be gambling, it could be anything actually that done appropriately would be really good for you. There's nothing that those idols are made out of that are bad. It's all good stuff, right? But what happens is we run to them thinking that they'll give us comfort and peace and freedom. But what happens is it flips the script on us and ensnares us and traps us and takes us down a pathway of bondage, of addiction, you see? And so Jeremiah liked to kind of poke fun. The whole human race is foolish and has no knowledge. The craftsmen are disgraced by the idols they make, for their carefully shaped works are a fraud. These idols have no breath or power. The idols are worthless. They are ridiculous lies. You see how that flows with idolatry? Brene Brown has said that in this cohort of American history right now, this present group of people alive in America today are the most in-debt, obese, medicated, and addicted cohort in American history. So all of us can deal with addiction to one degree or another. Some of it might just be you just eat too much and you just don't get a handle on it, and every morning you wake up, okay, I'm going to start over again today. You know? And but for other things, it can be any number of things. Healthy things can be done in unhealthy ways and turned into addiction. Even exercise, as great as exercise is for you, right? They said if you could put exercise in a pill, it'd be the best pill on the market today for everything, right? But we hadn't figured out how to put exercise in a pill yet, okay? So the making of the idols, the false promise of the idols, peace and comfort. We run to our idols to soothe us, to comfort us, sometimes just to numb out, to chill out. Sometimes we run to these idols, have you ever just wanted to turn off your brain? Have you ever just wanted to let go? Amygdala, shut up. You ever wanted to, I spent my life, if I had a negative emotion, a negative thought, my amygdala got triggered off, I spent my whole life trying to suppress it, fight it, conquer it, beat it up. But in the long run, that actually doesn't work too well. We have to learn to deal with our emotions in a different, more healthy way. So what's the pathway to freedom? Because that's the prophetic vision, is freedom. Well, the first weekend that I focused on this, I talked about the 12-step model, because if you look at 12 steps, if you look at every kind of addiction out there on the market, there's a 12-step group that deals with that. could be Overeaters Anonymous. It could be Alcoholic Anonymous. It could be Narcotics Anonymous. It could be Gambling Anonymous. It could be Sex Anonymous. It could be all kind. There's about a 12-step thing for everything. It's one of the most proven pathways. And the cool thing about the 12 steps are, they're very biblical. And it's really a pathway for freedom from addiction and, if you would, idolatry. So steps 1 through 3 are really about surrender, and we talked about that the first week. Steps 4 through 9 are about taking inventory. We talked about, hey, when you find yourself in the belly of the whale, good time to take inventory, right? And then making amends with people that we've hurt, wounded, offended. And then the last 3, 10, 11, 12, are really about how do we walk out, how do we maintain this new freedom. And I want to give you just a couple of ideas here. Number 1, vulnerability in community versus isolation. Vulnerability in community. You have to get real and open and honest. If you keep isolated and in secret, what does addiction do? It grows more powerful, right? It grows more powerful. Green Day sang another song called Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Talks about a guy who's just going to walk alone. He wishes somebody out there would find him, but until then, I'll walk alone. Now, that's not the pathway to freedom. Isolation is the friend of addiction, but it's the enemy of freedom. So the crazy thing is that when we feel embarrassed and shamed about a particular behavior and we don't want to tell anybody and we don't want to admit it, that's the most important time to admit it, get real, get open, get vulnerable with a group of honest people, and don't isolate. Because the tendency is to isolate, right? You can take a good gift, let's say wine. It's a good gift, it's from the earth, right? You could go out today with your father or family, toast, have a glass of wine, and it'd be a beautiful way to connect and celebrate Father's Day. But if you go home tonight and have a whole bottle of wine by yourself, whole different dynamic, right? Now you're isolated, now you're sloppy, slurry, now you fall asleep, wake up the next morning, and then you start the cycle over. It can take you down, right? I had a friend who was a bodybuilder years ago, and he worked out 5 hours a day. And he competed, he was a professional dancer, all this kind of stuff. But when he finally surrendered, he realized he had addiction about his health, body, and exercise was the way that he tried to control everything. He'd grown up with 2 alcoholic parents and had tried to use perfection as a way to control his life. And so he tried to perfect his body. He would literally obsess over every striation of his, like, does my calf look okay, guys? Can you see all the, you know how bodybuilders, like, they want to sculpt their body down to the veins and the tissues and the muscle. You get such little fat that you can see, your muscle. He would just obsess in the mirror morning, noon, and night and work out hours and hours a day. And he realized he was healthy, maybe, but it was an obsession that isolated him and brought him into a world of perfection that disconnected him from himself, others, and even God. You see how something good, exercise, can flip on you, right? And so a second pathway, vulnerability community, number 1. A second one, prayer and meditation versus numbing. We have our favorite things that we numb out to. A little bit, can be fine. Moderation can be fine. Watching a TV show, getting our mind off things can be fine. But then if you fall into an obsession and it takes you, and you run to that all the time to numb out your pain, then that can become a problem. Meditation, what I've learned, I used to meditate on scripture all the time, but meditation, as I'm practicing it now, helps me create more space in my life between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, said that we all have this thing where stimulus comes into our life, something triggers us, and then we have a response. In our fight, flight, fear brain, the amygdala, stimulus and response almost instantaneous, right? Stimulus comes, response, boom. But Viktor Frankl says between stimulus and response, there is this space. Even just a little space between stimulus and response. And in that space is growth and your freedom. Science behind mindfulness meditation, by the way, is that the more you practice awareness, and it's not stuffing your feelings, not stuffing your emotions, but it's actually connecting. It's actually like sitting down with, well, why am I feeling this fear? You become open, curious, and compassionate toward your amygdala, toward your fears. What you resist tends to persist. What you numb tends to persist. What you hide tends to persist. But if you sit and receive and become open and curious and compassionate, then it's like, it creates a little more space. The science shows that meditation actually opens up that space between stimulus and response, creates more of a pathway for freedom and growth, and you are able to face your fears and realize that they don't have to overwhelm you or lead you down an irrational path, all right? Number 3, service. Service. Addiction isolates us, numbs us out, and then we become super selfish and self-focused. And there are addicts that just really devolve into basically their whole day centers around their addiction and getting what their addiction will supply for them. And they forget about everybody else, and it's all about themselves. And so service is a way that we begin to open up our lives to connect with others. Spirituality is connection with self, connection with others, and connection with God. And this is a pathway to freedom. The last pathway is love and connection versus all those broken relationships. The pathway to freedom involves connection, love. The pathway of freedom involves taking inventory. When we've hurt somebody, we ask for forgiveness. We seek to make amends and bring peace to our relationships in our lives. So it's a beautiful vision that the prophets have of freedom from idolatry, freedom from addiction. The pathway that we see laid out is a pathway of connection to ourselves, to God, and to others. It's a beautiful path. It's a beautiful pathway to freedom. So Jeremiah was a prophet of the exile. When Jeremiah was prophesying, the southern kingdom, Judah, was being threatened by the Babylonians. In 587, the Babylonians actually conquered Jerusalem, tore down the temple, and carted all the Jewish people off into Babylonian captivity. It's called the exile. This is when Jeremiah was prophesying. And Jeremiah was seeing how the people of God had turned to idolatry, had turned to these addictive practices that did them no good. And now they're finding themselves in bondage, in exile, carried off into captivity. What a beautiful, dark metaphor, right? But in the midst of that darkness, in that exile, in that captivity, Jeremiah didn't leave them without hope. He comes back in Jeremiah 29 and he speaks these words. This is what the Lord says. You will be in Babylon for 70 years, but then I will come. By the way, let's hope we're not in Babylon for 70 years, right? If we're using this as out. 7 days is plenty, you know. I've felt like I've been in one for a while, but coming out, right? But you'll be there for a while, and then what? He says, then I will bring you home again. This is the prophetic imagination for freedom. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. He's speaking this to the people who are in bondage, captivity, and darkness. These are the plans I have for you, plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future hope In the days when you pray, I will listen. If you look for me wholeheartedly, you will find me. Wow. What a beautiful promise, right? Beautiful promise. You know, tomorrow is Juneteenth. It just became a national holiday just a couple of years ago. Back almost 20 years ago, I started partnering with pastors in the urban core, historic black churches in the urban core. And I had never even heard of Juneteenth. But we decided that we were going to do a big outreach to the core. We started this 20 years ago. We partnered with Convoy, and we decided we'd do food and haircuts and job applications and shoes and all kinds of stuff. And we went down to Swope Park, and we partnered with all the Juneteenth celebrations. So this is where I first learned about Juneteenth. And we did it in June, and it happened to be on this weekend, and it rained like cats and dogs, downpoured. And in the downpour deluge, I mean, Mayor Cleaver was there at the time. He was, all of these folks were there. And we still fed and did all of this work for over 10,000 people in the pouring down rain on Juneteenth. It was an amazing kind of experience. But I learned about Juneteenth. So how many of you know Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, right? Slaves are free. But guess what? It didn't happen automatically, did it? And the last state to be forced to recognize it was the state of Texas. State of Texas. Yeah. Surprise, surprise, right? I went to Baylor in 1979, and I guess because I was further north than Baylor, they called me a Yankee. I grew up around here, and I studied Yankees in the history books, right? But nobody, I grew up in Kansas City, nobody walked around calling me a Yankee. But when I went to Baylor, I was a Yankee, which I was fine to be a Yankee. I always identified with Yankees, but yeah. So Texas, finally, on June 19th, 1865, finally said, okay, slaves are free. So that's Juneteenth, the last state to recognize the Emancipation Proclamation, June 19th, 1865. Now, isn't it interesting? Then guess what? There still wasn't really freedom, was there? We saw, Jim Crow laws, segregation played out over our history. It took the civil rights movement to start undoing all of that stuff, right? And still at work doing all that work. But think about this just a minute as a metaphor. In our relationship to our higher power, we surrender. We surrender to Jesus. We surrender our lives. And in that surrender is the power and the relationship for freedom. But we got to walk it out. And we've got to live these steps of freedom to really realize the freedom that is in God, that is in our true nature. We have to walk it out. And so we do that together. That's why we're here. That's why we want to continue to celebrate God's presence together and be vulnerable, real people. A place where we can really talk about what we're dealing with, what our struggles are, be there for each other, be a community of vulnerability, transparency, openness, and radical love. This is the community that creates freedom. So let's pray. God, come and do a work in our hearts today. Bring freedom. Help us to walk out freedom in our daily lives, and help us to live the emancipation that we have in our relationship with you, God, and our true self. And so come and do that work as we continue our worship today. I'm going to invite Braxton and Tess back up, and they're going to do a song of meditation. I encourage you just to use this as a time to reflect on your life, your freedom, and walking that out.